talk about Trump being right, because this is, this is kind of a theme. I could do a story every single day about Trump being right, but let's talk about some of the things that Trump's been right on, and I'm just going to focus on some easy ones. We all know that Germany's in a fix because they became dependent upon Russian natural gas. It was Donald Trump who told them, you need to get alternatives. You have to get alternative supply chains, and as a result, and Germany laughed, and now they're trapped, and they can't respond to an emergency, and they're afraid to respond because Russia can turn off their natural gas, and they have stripped their ability to warm their homes, to make their electric cars run, and to do those kind of things. Simply by becoming completely reliant upon natural gas, as they've destroyed their nuclear and their coal-fired plants in the country. And if you're dependent upon natural gas for your heating and for your electricity and for your energy in your country, and the only people who get to send you natural gas are people who don't like you very much, guess what? Guess who's the slave and guess who's the slaveholder? At that juncture, Germany becomes a slave to the whims of Vladimir Putin. Just the way it is. Donald Trump said, you got to break this slavery. You got to break this. You got to get alternative supply chains. The Germans laughed, and now they know Donald Trump was right. Where else was Donald Trump right? Well, he's obviously right when he told NATO countries, you better start spending your own money on NATO. You better up your expenditures on national defense to meet the needs of NATO, because suddenly NATO is no longer an abstract concept where we're dealing with foreign, wars in Afghanistan and NATO allies sending, 2 Humvees and a Piper Cub. This is what NATO actually was established for, and suddenly they find themselves staring down the barrel of exactly what NATO was established for. And because Donald Trump stood up and said to them, start spending the money or else we're not going to, they raised their budgets for defense. And as a result, they're better prepared to deal with this crisis inside Europe rather than being totally dependent on the United States to solve their problems for them. So he was right there. He's been right. He was right on energy. We all know, and we talked about the natural gas, but he was right on energy because, in terms of becoming energy independent and what that meant. He put laws into place, he put regulations into place, he stripped away restrictions that caused America to be at the mercy of countries that, they may like us, they may not like us, but you never want to be at the mercy of other countries, at the mercy of OPEC for that matter. Since we had the OPEC energy crisis in '73, it has been rhetorically, every president until Joe Biden has rhetorically said, we need to become energy independent and get into great applause. While Donald Trump didn't just say it, he did it. And now Joe Biden is saying, oh, no, we don't want to be energy independent. In fact, we want to destroy our oil and gas industry. They're the enemy, coal, oil, and natural gas. They're the enemy. We have to destroy them. And we want to be dependent upon Venezuela and Iran and various countries around the world, and Russia, who will pump oil and natural gas. And meanwhile, creating a situation where we end up in a deficit, we end up being dependent upon them, much like Germany is dependent upon Russia right now. So where's the reason here? Obviously, he was right in the macro scale. He was right in the energy policy. But today, he came out and he was like, what are you doing by tapping the strategic oil reserve all the time? And attacking the Biden administration for their constant drawing down the strategic oil reserve. The strategic oil reserve is a stockpile of oil. About a third of it is held by the U.S. government, 2/3 is held by a private industry, but it's a stockpile, and it's a pretty large stockpile. And it's designed to be able to make sure that America can withstand a complete oil embargo for a longer period of time. In this case, it's it's about 60 days is how much our reserves are, and we're top when the tank's topped off at what the reserves are. Well, 3 years ago, we had a blip in the oil markets, and the price of oil went down really, really low. In fact, it was negative dollars, at one point on the futures market, due to some currency stuff, and things just went crazy there for about 14 days. And it was actually during the COVID crisis, so a year and a half ago. And Donald Trump looked at the low oil prices and he said, "Hey guys, let's top off the strategic oil reserve. Rather than, let's pay, if we're only paying 10, 15, 20 bucks a barrel, let's use this low price, the low price we have, and let's spend money to totally fill up, top off the strategic oil reserve." Well, the Democrats in Congress said, "No, we don't want to do that." And they passed legislation that prohibited that from happening as a rider inside of a funding bill. And so the president was not allowed to actually buy replacement oil for the strategic oil reserve based upon a rider by the Democrats in Congress. And so we didn't refill the strategic oil reserve at 20 bucks a barrel, 25 bucks a barrel. But we're drawing it down now that a barrel of oil is at 100 bucks. And Joe Biden's, once again, he's going to be releasing, I think, 1 million barrels a day for an extended period of time. I don't remember if he announced how many days, but basically 1 million barrels a day. What does that mean? Well, that's about 5% of our oil consumption domestically. So we're going to have, and so there will be some domestic price change as a result of that, because that's oil that doesn't have to be purchased. It's oil that's just being put into the system for free. So we will have an impact on the price of the pump, a small impact, but an impact. But the reality is, the strategic oil reserve is supposed to be for a very specific time, and presidents will do it to take price shocks out of the system all the time. But by and large, it's supposed to be used for when there is an actual oil shortage emergency, and we're not able to import the oil we need. And as a result, and you're going to have shortages, and you're going to have lines at the gas pump because there's not enough gas to pump. That strategic oil reserve is designed for that. The strategic oil reserve is designed for if we're in a military conflict, a war, and the supply routes for oil end up being cut, that we're able to provide oil and fuel for our military, for the machines in our military. So we're able to actually fight a war if needed, if the supply lines for imported oil are cut. And dependence on oil that has to be shipped across oceans make the chances of cutting supply lines pretty strong, given that basic fact. So what happens? Biden's now further depleting the strategic oil reserve. Now we're not like down on E. We're not, we may not even be at 3/4. But the fact of the matter is, in an emergency, you want every single drop of oil possible in the strategic oil reserve. We are sitting there. We've had conversations about what's happening in China with Taiwan, what's happening in the Middle East with Iran's rising and attacking, and has terrorists attacking Saudi Arabia, and the constant threat to Israel. We have questions about what's happening with cartels in Mexico, what's happening in Venezuela, where it's very likely Venezuela has missiles that are very dangerous to the southern part of the United States. And the Maduro government isn't very favorable to us. So there's lots of questions like that, where the normal stability in the world, the Pax Americana, is falling apart. And so there's real reason to believe that we could, when you see weakness, that we could end up in a real shooting war, where it's between major superpowers and supply lines to the United States, or they attempt to cut them. And China's developing a navy which has the capacity to go after the supply lines from Saudi Arabia. You have the capacity to shut off the Straits of Hormuz literally just sink ships in the Straits of Hormuz and make it so tankers can't get out. And you have on the other side in the Red Sea, they're attacking that passageway as well. So getting oil out of Saudi Arabia has two choke points, and they're both in danger of being able to be controlled by people who don't like us very much. And that's the strategy. That's what the Chinese and the Russians are trying to do. They're trying to isolate us in the world, make it so we're dependent on certain places to get our energy, to get our stuff, and then so they can choke that off and do so in a way that causes us to have massive problems, both economic and military. That's what they're doing. You don't have to be a genius. I mean, you just look at the world and you can see it. So, and that's why we have a strategic oil reserve. So we're less vulnerable to those choke points. And yet here we are. Joe Biden is going to bleed 1 million barrels a day every day for the foreseeable future out in order for political reasons, and he'll lower the price a little bit. But if he wants to lower the price and the gas tax and the federal gas tax for 6 months, he'll lower the price. And you won't be putting our strategic oil reserves in jeopardy of being depleted. So once again, Donald Trump was right. He said, let's top them off now. Let's not be just tapping it willy-nilly. Let's make certain we have a full supply in the event that we do face a real need to tap into it. And Joe Biden is sitting there saying, hey, this is a resource I can tap into, and it helps me short term. And I can say I'm doing something about oil and natural gas prices without actually doing anything that fundamentally fixes the problem, and while continuing policies that are designed to destroy America's energy industry. We talked a little bit about the budget yesterday, so I'm not going to go back into that. But trust me when I say they have no intention. The Biden administration has no intention of ever allowing any additional domestic oil and natural gas to be created, to be transported, to be shipped, and to be refined. That they view that as the thing they're trying to choke out. And so every effort they make in this area you have to realize they are choosing a pathway of dependency deliberately, because they're attempting to make America dependent upon the rest of the world under the guise of promoting so-called renewable energy. And the reason I harp on this is because this is everything. The energy is how we survive. You start having power outages and blackouts and inability to get gasoline for your cars, inability to get diesel for your trucks, and the entire system shuts down. And that's where they're going. And it doesn't break their heart when it happens. So as opposed to just quietly allowing Joe Biden to break everything, this is really an attempt to get people to be aware of what's going on. So you can, talk to your members of Congress, talk to your elected officials, talk to anybody who might be in the media, and just explain to them what's actually going on and why it's dangerous.